You said something like, well, yes, they're going to hate us. I'm not just saying they're going to hate you. I'm saying they're going to hate you way more than before. And there's going to be a lot of people who are like literally willing to die. Like those Hamas soldiers who went into Israel, a lot of them probably knew there was a real chance they weren't coming back.
Yeah.
And whatever you want to say about the religion and martyrdom, I was brought up Southern Baptist. I've been in a religion where people think they're going to heaven when they die. Believe me, they still don't want to die. Okay. Of course, they have the sense of, that they're serving their people and everything. And that drives them as well. But if you want to mobilize a lot of people to join a movement like Hamas and become militants, it really helps if like their sister is growing up without legs because of an Israeli bomb. That is a huge recruiting asset for Hamas or the next Hamas or whatever. And I think one difference between the way I view this and the way a lot of people in Israel view it is like, I view the hatred in general in extremist movements as being closer to the prime mover than things like the infrastructure that the leaders of the movement set up to channel the hatred into violence. I saw a really good documentary that was made in 2003 called Death in Gaza. And what's good about it is that this is during the occupation phase of Gaza. And what's good about it is it actually sustained, in a way, both of the theories of the case. In other words, it showed the infrastructure. There are these young Hamas militants, and one of the creepiest scenes I've ever seen anywhere was when they had a 14-year-old boy who looked like he was 12. And they were kind of encouraging him, to not to go out and get killed right now, but to embrace the idea that someday he might be a martyr. It was really creepy, and the interviewer challenged them on it. And so there is that infrastructure for channeling hatred into violence. But the other thing you saw in that was like these people were under occupation, which they were no longer literally after whenever 2005 under occupation, but which some people in the West Bank still are. And you just saw from the perspective of this kid, well, how could you grow up not hating Israelis? There's just no way. You never have a conversation. You only see them with guns. They've killed people you know. So this is my theory of the case is that the hatred is fundamental. And of course, it's going to take patience. It's a long-term game to try to pursue policies that let the hatred subside and try to build on the, less unfavorable sentiment. That's a very hard thing. But I personally think it's maybe the only thing that works unless you want to do actual ethnic cleansing. And I worry that may be what happens.
God forbid.
Yeah, I know. I want to say one more thing is that, and then I'll turn it over to you. I worry that I think it isn't just that most Israelis don't buy my theory of the case. It isn't just that they say it's this institution of Hamas that's implanting the hatred. If we could just get rid of this institution of Hamas, I think a lot of them do think that, but I think it goes beyond that, which I think there's this idea in Israel that, and has been for some time, look, and I think they almost mean the world, but a lot of people in the world, they are going to hate us no matter what we do, right? Whether it's anti-Israel sentiment, anti-Semitism, whatever, I think they think of it as like a universal constant almost. And so we might as well play hardball because they're going to hate us no matter what. I will say, yeah, okay. I'll
there's so many things I want to say. And I'd love to comment briefly so you could react, but it's going to be hard because there's so many great things that you said that I feel differently about. So I want to be clear. Let's start with the point that let's try to go sort of in reverse order. Yes, Jew hatred goes back a long way. So yes, there is a feeling here that they're going to hate us anyway. Especially because part of their religion seems to believe that Jews should be killed. That's not good. And we do feel it. And certainly on October 7th, we felt it. And so that's part of it. It's not quite true that the only thing they see are Israelis with guns. Many of the people, unfortunately, who were killed on October 7th were people on the left who were working to encourage cooperation and interaction between Israelis and Gazans. Many of them had Gazans working in their villages and towns, and they had permits to cross the border. There is a belief, it could be true, that helped them chart out where they attacked. Many of these people drove Palestinians to hospitals in Israel for medical treatment that was not available in Gaza. There are a lot of hospitals in Gaza we've discovered, real hospitals, not just sham covering up of say, terrorist command centers, but there are real hospitals there. There are real doctors. There are quite a few, actually. A lot of people are shocked how many there are and how many doctors there are. But a lot of people drove those folks when there was a treatment they needed that they couldn't get in Gaza. So there are people and will be people, I hope, in Gaza who don't just see airplanes, bombs, and soldiers. But your basic point is correct. And I think a thoughtful person has to confront the reality that if I lived there, I might feel the same way as they do. Hatred, desire to kill, desire for vengeance, and so on. And we might come back. I hope we do come back talking about what do you do with that? How do you break that? The point you made a minute ago, which I'll say something about where you start. I want to make a meta point first, which is interesting how much we want the moral high ground. Talked about this recently in this episode that hasn't aired yet with Hillel Cohen and others made the point before. See, I actually believe that Israel has been less destructive than the United States in its wars against civilian populations, say in Mosul and elsewhere, in its war against the Islamic State. But here's what's weird. I mean, what kind of is that the moral exemplar? A lot of people would say, what America did in there was horrible. In fact, Israel's a little bit better. And it would be interesting. We're not going to do it, but it would be interesting for you and I to sit down and just look at why I actually think Israel's done a better job in keeping civilian casualties down. But in a way, it's kind of it's interesting that I want to believe that, and people who don't like Israel's reaction don't want to believe it. But I think it's just interesting as human beings, we want to believe that our cause is just. But the only point I would make is that if Israel could do whatever it wanted and had no moral scruples and didn't care about international opinion, it could have flattened Gaza without any losing a single soldier. We have total control of the airspace. We have a lot more bombs. We didn't have to warn people to leave town. We didn't have to warn people to move to the south. So it is horrible. Yes, those buildings that the 21 soldiers died in yesterday were flattened anyway. We could have flattened them from the air, though, and we didn't because there's collateral destruction. So, again, I'm not sure how important that is, but I think it's interesting that it feels important, and it feels important to you too, I think, which is, just a human response. Let me try to say something about ending the this so-called cycle. You made the point of, what year do you start? I said they started it. They did start on October 7th, but of course you're right. There was mistreatment of Gazans before that. Israelis like to, and defenders of Israel like to point out, Israel withdrew in 2005. You could then debate whether they stayed. They did have some presence there. They did have still military response. They did have a blockade. I wasn't here, but we had a blockade. It wasn't an open air prison. That is I think, a propaganda line. There are many, many parts of Gaza we have learned. I didn't know this. I thought it was something like an open air prison. There are many parts of Gaza that on October 6th were beautiful. Parks and villas and beachfront and restaurants and car dealerships. I thought it was all giant slum. It's not. Much of it is, but I blame Hamas for that. We know now that they took enormous amounts of money and used it to build tunnels. An extraordinary achievement, by the way, engineering achievement and did it somehow without Israel knowing, despite the so-called, relentless surveillance. Israel did not do a good job. They didn't do a good job blockading them because Gazans got access to lots of weapons, and either they built them or they somehow smuggled them in. So if Israel was preventing Gaza from flourishing, even after we withdrew, it certainly was overcome, at least for military purposes. But I think the deeper question is, and we could spend the whole rest of the time just on this. I don't know if we want to, but how do you move forward? Israelis, there are some who hate Arabs, who would like to take vengeance, but the average Israeli just wants to live here. Now, I understand that phrase, just wants to live here, is a little bit misleading. In the course of doing so, we have a military presence in the West Bank. You called it occupation. It's certainly, I think that's the right term militarily, although over the years, we have given increasing control to the Palestinian Authority, just as we have left Gaza, which was a real military occupation. We had, again, men in the streets and mostly men, probably some women too, with military equipment. And we tried pulling out. Didn't help. Could argue it was too tough on the Gazans. But I think the problem is that they do seem to have a serious number of people who are hateful to the point of, as you say, and this is the key point, willing to sacrifice themselves to kill the enemy. And why do they only feel that about Israel and the Jews? There are many, many people who are abused in the Arab world. Palestinians have been abused and many, many times by the Jordanians, by the Lebanese, by many others. But they don't harbor a deep, hateful feeling toward those folks. They don't sacrifice their lives. They put that down and moved on. We're different. And we, meaning Israel and the Jews.
Thanks for watching Nonzero Clips. To hear more of this conversation and others like it, subscribe to the Nonzero YouTube channel or the Nonzero podcast feed. And to gain access to exclusive podcast content, subscribe to Robert Wright's Nonzero newsletter on Substack.